Hey readers, welcome back to another review. Again, this book is so good. The ending angered me, and it's not Natasha Preston, but it's okay, because it's not a standalone, so the rest of the series kind of fixed some stuff. But this is The Ballad of Never After, which is the second in the series that starts with Once Upon a Broken Heart. As I mentioned in that one, this one's kind of having the same problem of the delicate cover, so I'm being really, really careful with it. Cosmo's just ran in, and he's now wanting all the scritches and all the attention. But this book is so good. I mean, all of her books are so good, and I finished the entire series as of when I'm recording this, and I finished it, and like half an hour after I finished it, I was like, I want to go back and read it so that I can like get more, and then I was like, no, but wait, it's over, and I was so sad. It's such a good series overall, but this book specifically, very, very, very interesting. It's definitely similar to the first in that it has a ton of really dramatic plot twists, really dramatic events that happen, and it's so good at kind of leading the reader into things with the character, like just leaving the reader and the character conflicted about various other people, and so good. I think in this one it's interesting because you start to kind of get more lore of certain parts of the past and like the history. Cosmos wants all the attention right now. But it's such an interesting kind of continuation where in the first one, there's sort of like the basis of some of the lore, but then in this one you get a lot deeper into some of the lore. And also this one I think is really interesting because it kind of brings one of the old stories that is part of the lore kind of into modern reality in a really interesting way, and I have to be really, really careful with how I say that because I don't want to give away too much and spoil anything, but it kind of does bring that back in a way, in like a really obvious way, but then at the same time there's a different way that it's also kind of being presented that's a lot more subtle, so it's really, really interesting. I love just this author is so good at foreshadowing things, but making it really, really subtle, so it's not obvious, but then looking back, you're like, oh my gosh, she mentioned that so long ago, that makes sense. Because I feel like some authors, when they foreshadow things, they're a little bit too obvious, and there's like a really fine balance of doing foreshadowing where it feels like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense looking back, and like, I stood at the doorway of the dark room and I felt like something bad was gonna happen if I walked inside, and then later something bad happens. It's like, that's a little too obvious, and I feel like some authors go a little bit more into that route, and then there's some foreshadowing where I feel like authors try to put it in and it's so subtle that no one ever picks up on it. But this author is so good at the perfect balance of foreshadowing in a way that doesn't spoil anything, but looking back, you're like, oh, I was there the whole time. And there are several instances of that in this book, which again, I'm having to be really, really careful because of spoilers. I don't want to give away anything that would give away any plot twists or anything, because there are a lot in this book. It is so good, though, and I knew I was gonna do this review, and I knew I had to kind of get it out of my system, so I was talking to my mom the other day, and I'm like, you're not gonna ever read this, right? And I just kind of, like, told her kind of the main plot of both sort of the end of this book, and then the third book, because the third book, which I'm also reviewing today, oh, it's so good. But I'll get to that in that review. I need her to write more books, because I've read all of the ones I believe that she has published so far, and I am sad about it, because I want more. Even though I have a whole stack that I need to still read this year, and I am starting to read Sunrise on the Reaping, which is really interesting being back in that world. Very different than this. Very emotionally destructive, the way that a lot of people have said that it is. But these books are so good. All of Caraval, all of this series, I love it. It's probably in, like, my top 5 series ever. Both this and Caraval, and it's so hard to rank books like that, but it's so good. I love it so much, and I wish that I had people to talk about it with, because, oh my gosh, it's so complex that pretty much everything that I want to talk about could potentially give away too much. But also, the world building is amazing. There's a cool map at the front of the book, which is always fun when books have that. I also think that I talked about this, in the first, book, but the protagonist, Evangeline, I was talking about how she kind of has a sense of sort of being naive about things, because she really, really, really wants to see the best in people, which I think is a good trait to have, of wanting to see the good in people, and so it makes her really likable instead of making her seem like, oh, she's so stupid, like, don't trust that person. It definitely comes from a place of she doesn't want to believe that everyone's bad, and it's so interesting, and again, I'm trying to be really careful also, because I've finished the series, so I don't want to say things that are too much into the third book, too, but she is, at the beginning of this book, she is determined to never trust a certain person again, and if you've read the first book, you probably know who that might be. But she is so determined, she writes herself a letter, and that letter actually becomes really important in the third book in a way that's so good. It's so interesting. I love it. But she is like, never trust this person again. Never believe this person again. Everything that they say is manipulation and none of it's real. But because of circumstances that are out of anyone of their control, they do end up having to interact more than she initially would like them to have to interact. Also, there's a thing at the beginning of this book where I called something before it happened, and it was a little bit one of those moments where the character was doing something that I thought was kind of a stupid thing to do. And I was reading it, and I was like, no, don't do it. It's that thing. I know it's that thing. And it was. And it's like, if I was in her position, which is a little bit hard to imagine, I guess, but especially because as the reader, you know stuff that maybe the character doesn't, or maybe the character isn't thinking about, but if I was in her position, I would be so careful about stuff like that, and she wasn't. And ultimately didn't end up, like, causing a huge problem at that point in the book. It was really, really interesting. I also feel like the end of this book was really, really well written. The very, very end left me so angry at one of the characters. But kind of like the end sequence in this book, it was so good. It was so well written, and it was so interesting because you kind of got to see a little bit of insight into a character in a way that you didn't in the past, because this series for the first 2 books is primarily told from the protagonist's perspective only. But at the very, very end, you get a little bit of insight into sort of how things work in a few other people's minds, and what their motives for certain things are, what kind of their beliefs about how things work are, as well as some of their own emotions or feelings about things, which is very, very interesting. The end angered me, but it's in a very different way than when, like, I feel like the ending is kind of cheating out of an ending. It's a good ending from a writing perspective. I think the author did a really, really good job. But that character is a douche. And so I'm mad at the character, not the author, but it's so good. And I think it's also really, really interesting, too, because I feel like there's been sort of this whole lead up throughout the first and second book about the mystery of how much do I say here? About the question of what a certain thing actually contains, and the story curse has kind of shifted people's beliefs about that, so it's really interesting to kind of try and see sort of what the reality is, because I feel like there's a lot of times when I think it's really easy for an author to set up a thing like that, where it's like, it's 2 books of suspense about what is this thing. And I feel like when authors have that kind of mystery, sometimes it's very easy, and I've had this in my own books that I write, so I feel like I can say this. It's very easy to get to the reveal and feel like, oh, that's all it was? Aw. Like, this kind of, you had this whole build-up, and now it's, okay. But I feel like that wasn't how it was in this book. It was so interesting. It made sense what it was also, which I think was, it wasn't something that I'd necessarily expected. But when I found out what it was, I was like, oh my gosh, that does make so much sense. That's so interesting. Very, very good. I think also, and I talked about this a lot in reviews of Defy the Stars, that series, which I think also is probably up there in my favorite series. But it's very, very interesting because I feel like this book, series as a whole, but especially this specific book, I feel like deals a lot with questions of, like, humanity and ethics, kind of, because there are some characters who are not human. There are some characters who, it's kind of unclear what their motives are. There are some characters who are behaving in a way that is questionable, especially at the end. The thing that happens at the end, not cool. Don't do that. I don't think anyone human in the real world has the ability to do that, but he sucks. But I really, really liked it. I think it's also, again, interesting because there is that kind of overlap with stuff that happened in Caraval, and you see a little bit more of the details of some of that stuff, or, like, how that impacted a certain character, which I think is really interesting. Very, very good. And I also just think that it's so interesting. Like I said, the author does a really good job of manipulating the reader's feelings. And I say manipulated, and I feel like that comes with a pretty negative connotation usually, but in this case I feel like it's really, really well done in a good way, because it is manipulation, but it's in a way where it kind of makes the book more compelling and more realistic, because the way that certain characters are manipulating other certain characters, the reader also kind of starts to be manipulated with the character about, like, maybe this is the right thing, maybe this person is telling the truth, maybe this person is worse than I thought, like, all this stuff that's happening. It's kind of interesting to be like, I had an opinion about this, but also, like, it kind of, maybe it's not too much. This, yeah, it's really, really, really well written, and I think that the same thing with Caraval, and I think I can say this in a way that isn't too much of a spoiler, but in Caraval, kind of the big mystery is the actual identity of a certain character. Legend is, this is kind of like a thing that's introduced really early into the book, so I feel like I can say it. Legend is the person who runs Caraval, but his identity is a mystery. He's played by actors a lot of the time, so there's, like, kind of a mascot of him, but it isn't actually his real self who is, like, the appearance of who he is in the actual Caraval event. And so kind of throughout that whole series, there's the question of, like, who is Legend really? Have they met him? Do they know him? Like, there's just a lot of questions, and I feel like that's kind of, the way that she does the plot twists in that are also very well done. Cosmos is back. But I think in this one, it's less of, like, who a person is, and more, like, who, like, less, like, what is the identity of a person in terms of who a person is, and more, like, what are this person's true colors, true intentions, and also, can this person, various people, can various people change in either for the worst or for the better? Those are kind of the questions that this book brings up, which I think are all very, very interesting. Cosmos wants all the attention right now. Hi! And so, in general, I feel like, okay, there you go, bye! Yeah, this book, so good, so well written, 10 out of 10, 100 out of 10, love this book, love this author. I need more, I need another series. I also am going to go straight from this into a review of the third one, so it's so hard for me to not say stuff about the third one right now, because the third one is very, very good. I will say that this one is really interesting because I think it kind of, like I was saying before, the first couple tend to also sort of put questions of other characters, like, are they good, are they bad, are they trustworthy, are they not, and sort of like breaking the stereotypes, a little bit of like a typical like happily ever after kind of thing. And I think that that is really interesting. But I would also say that this book has a couple things that happen that kind of put that doubt on the character too, and even she's like questioning, I never thought I would do that, I never thought I could do that, and it's very, very interesting, because it's like, this feels so wrong that this happened, that I did this, or, you know, I don't feel like I should have done that, but I'm conflicted about how I feel after it. Just all the stuff. It's so, so, so well written. So good. I love that it is from just the one perspective for the first two books, because it actually does change in the third, and I'll talk about that in my review of the third. But I think that having it from just the one perspective for the first two is a really good choice, because it does make the reader more more manipulated, I guess, or more like questioning how the things are happening and what's happening, and when the character is wondering about something, the reader is too, because they don't know the other side. Whereas the third, it alternates between two or three perspectives. There's kind of two main ones, and then sometimes the third, which I'll talk about more in that. But I do think that that was a really interesting choice for the last one, because then you do know the full story, and I feel like there's no way of knowing some of those details if it was just from the one perspective, because they're things that at the end of the book she never found out about certain things. So by having it from the other perspective, it kind of adds that, and then it makes you more on the side of one person or the other. When the character's kind of torn between, it's very, very good, and I'm going to record that review now, so I'm very, very excited. Highly recommend it. Like I said when I reviewed the first one, if you have not read Caraval, definitely read it first. It's very, 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 very good, like this one. And this series does have some spoilers for Caraval, because this in the timeline takes place after the third book in the Caraval series. And it doesn't have a ton, like, you don't have to know Caraval to understand this series, but if you're planning to read Caraval 2, you will have some spoilers if you read this series first. Cosmos is back in here again, getting scratches, but with that, I'm going to leave this here. Let me know what you're reading. Let me know if you've read this or Caraval, and what you thought, if you have read either of those. And thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and keep reading. Bye!